Hey folks, time for another vlog. This one is on Gravity Falls Season 1, Episode 14, which I don't remember the title of, but it may have been Bottomless Pit. This was more like it. This was a really fun episode. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed, the unique way it was structured. It's an old format, but it's unique thus far in Gravity Falls. Namely, it's a very old format, it goes back to at least the Canterbury Tales. But it's, okay, these characters are now stuck together, they pass the time by telling stories to each other. And each of their stories stars themselves, tells us something about them, and also they produce themes that can be riffed on in the other stories. So first up, we've got Dipper's story, which was a pretty typical Dipper story. It was him feeling anxiety, and he decides to, prove himself. In this case, he was feeling anxiety about his voice, and that the others were making fun of him for his voice, which is a very common thing. Very often boys' voices crack during puberty. They jump back and forth between a deeper voice and a higher pitched voice. So he decides to go and get that deeper voice. And Old Man McGuckin, I like the reference that Dipper remembered him building the sea monster robot thing. But he provides him with a voice-changing formula. And silliness ensues. Dipper realizes that people liked his old voice, that it was him, that this new voice, while it's deeper, isn't him, it's very artificial. I think Seuss compares it to a commercial, which is accurate. It's a voiceover type voice. I'm not sure what that accent is called. It's sort of the American equivalent of received pronunciation. It's like the standard radio announcer voice, commercial voiceover voice, whatever. Still, it was fairly standard Dipper plot, but it was amusing enough. I liked the gag of him saying, "We'll be back after these messages," as he, instead of goodbye. So yeah, more interesting in terms of character insights, because it's a character we haven't gotten to know that well before, is Seuss's story, which he has he's playing pinball, he gets the high score by cheating, and Dipper, and Mabel get sucked into the game, have a little adventure inside it. And this ties in with something we'd seen before when, and I mentioned really enjoying when Seuss got stuck inside the game cabinet because he tried to, travel inside the game. That's clearly an idea that he's very interested in. It's on his mind a lot, because now we see, again, it shows up in the story he tells where he gets sucked into the game and trapped inside it. We also see that he really feels the need to prove himself. But unlike Dipper, who's looking for the markers of adulthood, Seuss is looking for real achievement. And he finds it not in getting the high score on the game, which is, kind of an empty achievement, especially since he cheated to get it, but in saving the other kids. In saving Dipper and Mabel. So I thought that was sweet. Tells you, again, that he cares about them a great deal, since rescuing them became his achievement in his story. And so that was a very sweet story, a lot of fun. And then we come to Grumble Stan's story, which was utterly ridiculous, and we only saw, because he only told the end of it, where he apparently saved football or something with his football robot. It was terrible, but entertainingly terrible. Uh, and it kind of shows, again, Stan's money-focused idea, because this is a story created by a marketing committee. It has the sports, it has the, quote-unquote beautiful woman, little hard to tell in this art style. It has all these features that are calculated to appeal. Stan even says the robot was added, for appeal to the kids. It's all very calculated, and at the same time very self-aggrandizing. Because, of course, Stan has a gigantic ego. And then we get to the most interesting one, in my opinion. Because Mabel's story does something different from the others. First of all, the other three stories all prominently featured deceptions, cheating. Dipper got the fake voice, Seuss cheated at the game, and Stan's entire story was a lie. I mean, all the stories were probably false, but Stan's was just completely absurd, self-serving. Not to mention that I'm pretty sure deploying a robot on the football field would be considered cheating. Speaking of which, another little insight in Stan's story, he's got some anxiety about getting older. He's starting to worry about being perceived as useless. That was right there in his story. That was the lesson he supposedly taught the football players, was that, old people still have value. So clearly that's something he's worried about, which is, kind of understandable and also kind of sad. That, underneath all of that bravado and kind of nastiness is an old man who worries about whether anybody cares about him, who worries about whether he's taken seriously, who worries about maybe whether he's loved, whether he's needed. That's sort of touching once you get past all the Grunkle Stan he's built around it. But anyway, Mabel's story is kind of the inverse. It's about her trying to get Stan to stop lying. But at the same time, it is kind of a cheat. Because she does it by essentially taking away his free will. She takes away his ability to lie. She forces him to behave in a way that she sees as good. Which, is very much not good. You can't take that kind of shortcut, because denying the freedom of others is almost always going to be worse than whatever it was they would have done if they had that freedom. There are some exceptions, which is where you get into stuff like, what do you do with criminals, and how far do you go to prevent this and that, and so forth. But generally speaking, taking away someone's ability to lie is a pretty extreme response to a relatively minor act. And I do have to appreciate that the general moral they came to was, lying is okay when you're lying to the police. Which, basically, yeah. Pretty much. But surprising to see it coming out of something as status quo dedicated as Disney. But every once in a while they sneak something under the radar. But yeah, then where it gets really interesting is at the end, when it's revealed that this story was basically true. Some of the details may or may not be accurate. Grunkle Stan says that everything except the bear sounds really implausible, which is funny because the bear was ridiculous. But there's still a lot of evidence. Dipper says, well, why would you tell us that story? We just lived it. But what that does, in a sense, is break them out of falling. Let me explain what I mean. At the end of the episode, Dipper posits that they have passed through a wormhole. That's not entirely accurate. It might be a wormhole, it might be something else. What it definitely is what's called a closed timelike curve. And what a closed timelike curve is this idea in physics. It's purely theoretical. No one's ever found one or any evidence of one. But the idea is it's a path through space-time that ends up back where it started. The same point in both space and time where you began. So you go off on some kind of a journey and end up at precisely the place and moment where you started. So effectively a form of time travel, but one where you can't go back before the point you started at. You can go forward and then back. So you can do Back to the Future 2, but not Back to the Future 3. And that's effectively what Mabel is doing. She tells a story that ends where the episode begins, looping them back around to the start and freeing them from the bottomless pit. And it works. The reason it works is because of something that I've talked about a lot in my written stuff, but I'm not sure if I've ever really addressed it in these vlogs. So I'm going to go, if you've read a lot of my written stuff, this may be a little basic for you, but I'll try to be brief. Basically, it's kind of a fundamental principle of looking at narrative critically. Anything with a narrative. Literature, film, animated television, whatever. And what it is that all fiction is fictional. You might be saying, well, duh. Of course. That's what the words mean. But that has implications. All fictional is fictional. All fiction is equally fictional. No fiction is any more real than any other. What that means is that all arguments about canon are pointless. Because the Star Wars movies are exactly as fictional as the Star Wars books, which are exactly as fictional as the Sherlock Holmes books, which are exactly as fictional as bad fan fiction written by a 10-year-old who's never written anything before. All fiction is equally fictional. The other thing it means is that where in real life stories are not real, dreams are not real, these things are fictions, we are more real than they are. That's not true in a story. The story within a story being told in this episode is no less real than the episode as a whole. They're both equally fictional, and therefore, Mabel creating that loop with her story within a story can work symbolically as a loop in the larger story. Because stories don't necessarily work according to normal causal logic. They generally work according to narrative logic. Things happen not because event A caused event B, but just as often, event A happens because event B needed it to happen. In real life, using the classic Chekhov's gun example, in real life, Bob is able to shoot Joe using the gun on the mantelpiece because there was a gun on the mantelpiece. If there wasn't one, he wouldn't have been able to do it. In a story, it's the other way around. You show the gun on the mantelpiece early on because Bob is going to use it to shoot Joe later. Things don't have to make direct logical sense. They can work in other directions. They can work symbolically. Sometimes things happen in stories that make no sense in real life, but they work in the story because they're cool, or because they resonate emotionally, or because they make symbolic sense. By creating a story within a story, Mabel has created a microcosm. She has created a little universe within the larger universe. And the two reflect one another. She can use that. She uses that effectively to close the loop. You'll notice Mabel is the only one who does her own magic in all of this. In Seuss's story, he and the others are sucked in by the magic, the external magic of the pinball machine. Dipper is given his magic by McGuckin. Mabel goes to the journal, which seems to be kind of the source of magic. It's the tome around which all the weirdness in this show kind of revolves, and uses it. She uses its knowledge to seek out magic that she can use. There's a word for that. Someone who has the knowledge of magic. It is a word that comes from the same root as wit. It comes from the same root as whiz. It comes from the same root. It comes from the same root as wisdom. It comes from the same root as wizard. Witch. She has magic. She is one who knows. And with that power, at least within the confines of this particular episode, Mabel has the power to close the loop. Because her story contains the symbols of looping back to the beginning, the world around her, the void upon which she can express her will because there is nothing else in it except the others. And we've already seen that compared to Mabel, the others have effectively no wills at all. Mabel is the strongest personality in that group. That's enough to warp things back to the beginning and return them all to where they started. Yeah, it's a completely absurd reading of the episode. It's esoteric and bizarre and hinges on looking at things in a way that is, well, like I just said, esoteric, bizarre, and looking at things in terms of magic. But again, that's how stories work. That's what magic is. Magic is the world working according to the stories that we tell instead of the actual way it works, which generally cares not at all about what we want. Stories run according to magic. They run according to symbol. They run according to reference. They run according to dream logic. And so Mabel returned them all to the beginning. I'll be very curious to see if, as the series goes on, this continues, of Mabel being able to do this kind of magic. It would be an interesting development if Dipper is kind of the seeker while Mabel is the more intuitive one. That's a fairly standard thing to do with, boys versus girls. But at the same time, it would be very funny if Dipper just kept looking and looking while Mabel just sort of casually picked up magic here and there and did all sorts of bizarre things. And come to think of it, that already sort of happened in the episode that introduced Gideon, didn't it? It was Mabel who acquired the power and saved the day. Yeah, I'm definitely going to keep an eye out for more instances of that happening. I'm a little bit biased simply because I like Mabel about 10,000 times better than I like Dipper. But it would be cool if it continued developing in that direction. Anyway, I'm aware this vlog got a little bit weird. That happens sometimes. I hope you all enjoyed it. And I'll see you all next time for the next episode of Gravity Falls. Bye.